While your energy bill went up, Keir Starmer got on a plane to China. That is not a political argument. That is a sequence of events. Your bill went up. He flew to Beijing. He sat across the table from Xi Jinping. He smiled for the cameras. He shook hands. And then he came back to Britain and stood at a podium and told the country he had secured a glorious triumph for British diplomacy. Kemi Badenoch asked him what he actually got. He had no answer. That is the first thing you need to know. But it is not the most damaging thing. The most damaging thing is what happened before he even boarded the plane. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the second most powerful person in his own government, was not allowed to go. Rachel Reeves, the woman responsible for Britain's economy, the person who would normally lead trade and financial negotiations with the world's second largest economy, was refused entry, blocked, left behind. While Starmer flew to Beijing to talk about climate and cyber issues, his own Chancellor was sitting in London because China decided she was not welcome. Think about what that means for a moment, and we will come back to it, because it gets worse. The third thing you need to know before we go any further is this. While Starmer was in Beijing, a conflict in the Middle East was sending energy prices spiraling across Europe. Oil markets were volatile, gas prices were rising, every household in Britain was about to feel it in their bills. And the Prime Minister was in China, not in Downing Street, not in emergency meetings with energy companies, not on the phone to allies about protecting British consumers. He was in Beijing, getting his photograph taken. Kemi Badenoch stood up in the House of Commons and said what every person watching from home was thinking. It looked like a dream come true for a man who was virtually a communist most of his life. The chamber erupted. Because she had just said the thing nobody in polite political discourse was supposed to say, and because everyone watching knew there was truth buried in the provocation, not the communist line specifically, but the image it created. A prime minister more comfortable on a state visit to an authoritarian regime than in Parliament answering questions about why British households cannot afford to heat their homes. Subscribe to this channel right now. What you are about to hear is the full picture of what happened on that trip, what Kemi exposed when Starmer got back, and why the combination of those two things tells you everything about the priorities of the man currently running Britain. Mainstream media will not put this story together for you. They will give you the press conference, the diplomatic language, the official readout. We will give you what was actually said in that chamber when the cameras were pointed somewhere else. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's start with what Starmer said he went to achieve. Because the stated purpose of the China trip matters. He said it was about growth, about trade, about Britain engaging with the world's second largest economy, as a confident, outward-facing nation. He said the relationship between Britain and China was important enough to require leader-to-leader discussions, where all the difficult issues could be raised directly. He presented it as a moment of diplomatic strength, Britain back at the top table, replacing incoherence with pragmatic engagement. Kemi Badenoch had one question. What did you actually get? Not in principle, not in intention, not in the language of diplomatic communiques that say both sides agreed to continue dialogue on areas of mutual interest. Specifically, concretely, what did Britain gain from this trip that it did not have before Starmer boarded the plane? The answer, when you strip away the language of diplomatic success, is remarkably thin. The most significant announcement Starmer made on his return was the lifting of sanctions on 4 Conservative MPs. He presented this as a victory, as something China had done as a gesture of goodwill following his visit. Kemi Badenoch's response to that was devastating in its simplicity. He claimed a glorious triumph with the lifting of sanctions on 4 Conservative MPs, as if he had done us a favour. He flew to China. He sat with Xi Jinping. He raised cyber issues and climate and nature. And the headline achievement he brought back was that China agreed to stop sanctioning 4 members of the British opposition party, while energy bills were rising. Now let's talk about the Chancellor. Because this detail has not received nearly enough attention, and it should make every person watching genuinely angry. Rachel Reeves was not allowed to go to China. Not because of a scheduling conflict. Not because she was needed elsewhere. Because China refused to include her in the delegation. An authoritarian state that actively seeks to undermine British interests, that runs extensive intelligence operations inside this country, that funds regimes hostile to Britain around the world. That state told the British Prime Minister that his Chancellor was not welcome on the visit. And Starmer went anyway. Think about the negotiating position that creates. You are about to sit across the table from the leader of the world's second largest economy. You want to discuss trade. You want to talk about investment. You want to secure agreements that benefit British businesses and British workers. And the person who controls Britain's finances, who understands the economic detail, who would be the one implementing any agreements made, she has been told she cannot come. By the country you are about to negotiate with. Kemi Badenoch called it exactly what it is. Starmer's negotiating tactic has always been to give everything away, in the hope that people will be nice to him in return. That is not a political attack. That is a description of a pattern. A prime minister who agreed to the Chagos Islands deal and came back calling it a diplomatic success, A prime minister who agreed to commitments in Ukraine before the details were settled and called it leadership. A prime minister who flew to China while his chancellor was blocked from attending, sat through meetings where all the difficult issues were supposedly raised, and came home to announce that China had agreed to stop sanctioning 4 MPs. Each time the pattern is the same. Starmer makes concessions. Starmer frames them as victories, and the things that actually matter to the people who voted for him, the energy bills, the cost of living, the jobs, the economic security, stay exactly as they were, or get worse. You know what that means, right? Britain is being represented on the world stage by a prime minister who measures diplomatic success by whether the other side is being nice to him. And while he is measuring niceness in Beijing, your bill is going up. Now let's get to the energy numbers, because this is where the China trip stops being an abstract diplomatic story and becomes something that lands in your bank account every single month. Kemi Badenoch has been standing at that dispatch box, pointing to one specific solution that Starmer refuses to implement: North Sea drilling. The Jackdaw and Rosebank gas fields, enough gas to heat 1.6 million British homes, sitting under British waters, waiting for a decision that Starmer's government will not make. Gas that Britain is currently importing from Norway, the same gas, from the same seabed, but extracted by a different country and sold to Britain on international markets at international prices. While Starmer was in China talking about climate and cyber issues, Britain was buying its own gas from Norway. And the Conservative plan, the plan Kemi laid out while Starmer was on his way back from Beijing, would take VAT off domestic energy bills for the next 3 years, £94 off the average household energy cost. Not a promise of future savings from a green energy transition that will take years to deliver. £94 off your next bill. If the government chose to do it. Starmer's government has chosen not to. The visit to China did not include any discussion of energy security in terms of British domestic production. It did not include any commitment to review the North Sea drilling ban in light of the conflict in the Middle East pushing prices up. It did not result in any concrete measure that would reduce what you pay to heat your home. What it resulted in was a joint statement about climate cooperation and a photograph. Kemi Badenoch said something in the House of Commons after Starmer gave his statement about the China trip that cut through every piece of managed diplomatic language in the official readout. Of course, Britain should engage with China, even though the Chancellor wasn't allowed to go, even though they are an authoritarian state who seek to undermine our interests, even though they spy on us, sometimes within the walls of this building, even though they fund regimes around the world hostile to our country. They are a fact of life, a global power, and an economic reality. What we are criticising is his supine and short-sighted approach. Supine, look that word up if you need to. It means lying on your back, passive, facing upward while someone else stands over you. It is the most precise possible description of a prime minister who goes to China without his chancellor, gets told which members of his delegation are acceptable, raises all the difficult issues in private meetings where nothing is recorded, and comes back to announce that the other side has agreed to be slightly less hostile to 4 British politicians. That is not strength. That is not Britain at the top table. That is a country whose prime minister needed this trip to look like a success so badly that he accepted whatever terms were on offer and called it diplomacy. Subscribe to this channel, because what you just heard, the full account of what Starmer went to China to achieve and what he actually got, is not the version you will see anywhere else. They will give you the handshake photo. They will give you the diplomatic language. They will give you the official statement about constructive and productive discussions. We will give you Kemi Badenoch asking what Britain actually came home with. Subscribe now and share this with someone who is opening energy bills that are higher than they were told they would be while the Prime Minister was in Beijing, getting his photograph taken. Now let's talk about what this trip reveals about something bigger. Because the China visit is not an isolated story. It is the latest example of a pattern that Kemi Badenoch has been exposing for months. A prime minister who is more comfortable with the theatre of international diplomacy than with the grind of domestic policy, who would rather be seen shaking hands with world leaders than answering questions in Parliament about why your energy bill has not come down, who measures the success of his government by how he is received on the world stage, rather than by whether the people who voted for him are better off. The Chagos Islands deal cost Britain £3.5 billion and was called an act of great stupidity by the President of the United States. Starmer called it a diplomatic success. The Ukraine troops' commitment was made without a full parliamentary statement. Starmer called it leadership. The China visit produced a lifting of sanctions on 4 MPs and a climate cooperation statement. Starmer called it Britain back at the top table. Every single time, the gap between the official description and the actual outcome is enormous. And every single time, the people who bear the cost of that gap are the ones sitting at home, paying bills, watching the news, wondering why the change they voted for has not arrived. Kemi Badenoch is the person making that gap visible. She is the one standing up after each diplomatic triumph and asking the question the government does not want asked. Not whether the trip happened, not whether the meetings took place, but what Britain actually got. What changed? What is different today, that was not different before the Prime Minister boarded the plane? In the case of China, the honest answer is very little. The Chancellor is still not welcome in Beijing. The North Sea is still not being drilled. The energy bills are still higher than when this government took office. And the photograph from the meeting with Xi Jinping is on the front page of every newspaper, while the £94 that could come off your energy bill sits waiting for a government decision that is not coming. That is the story of the China trip. Not the handshake, not the climate cooperation statement, not the glorious triumph of the 4 MPs being desanctioned. The story is what did not happen. The meeting that did not happen with the Chancellor because she was not allowed to come. The energy security discussion that did not happen because North Sea drilling is someone else's decision. The concrete outcome that did not happen because Starmer's approach to negotiation is to hope the other side will be nice to him. Kemi Badenoch asked him to his face what he got. He talked about pragmatic engagement and Britain's place in the world and the importance of leader-to-leader discussions. She asked again. He talked about the lifting of sanctions on 4 MPs. She looked across the chamber and delivered the verdict that the country deserved to hear. He gave everything away. He came back with nothing, and your energy bill is still going up. Share this video with everyone you know who is paying more for their energy than they were promised they would be. Share it with everyone who watched that photograph from Beijing and wondered what Britain actually got in return. Share it with everyone who deserves to know that while the Prime Minister was shaking hands in China, the plan that would put £94 back in their pocket was sitting unused on a shelf in Westminster. Mainstream media will not tell you that story. They will give you the official version, the managed language, the diplomatic success. We will keep telling you what was actually said when Kemi Badenoch stood up and refused to accept the official version. Subscribe now. Because the only accountability this government faces is the accountability that people like you demand by watching, sharing, and refusing to let the gap between what they say and what they do disappear into the news cycle. He went to China, your bills went up, he came back with nothing, and she caught him.